Hi guys, and welcome to Fix Savers. Today we're continuing our series on pool table videos, and we're going to be looking specifically on how to level up your pool table slates. Okay, so as you can see, we have our slates on the table. A couple of important tips to go over. If you're unsure of the positioning of the slates on the table, i.e. you didn't mark them before you remove them, that's not a problem. What you want to do is put only the center one on first and then measure up. So imagining for a second this slate right here doesn't exist, we've only put on the center slate and we want to get this centrally positioned in relation to the frame. What you want to do is go around and measure the edge just here. Take that measurement, so that's a measurement from the edge of your slate to the base frame just in here, and then transfer that measurement over to the opposite corner of the same slate right here. Measure that as well, make sure that matches. And then of course we're going to go over to the other side of the slate just in here, measure that, make sure that matches, measure that, make sure it matches. Obviously you can move the whole slate backwards or forwards as you need to get it centered in that direction. So again, this is our center slate. Imagine that the outer slate is not in position, and we want to ensure that our center slate is centered on the table in this direction. We've already done it in this direction, but now we want to do it in this direction. All you need to do is you need to measure from the side of your slate to the end of your wooden frame. So obviously we can't quite see because we do have the slate on top. Just measure from there to the edge of the wooden frame and then compare that to the opposite side, and then obviously you can adjust that that center slate as possible, as required. But you want to ensure that this center slate right here is dead central in relation to the wooden frame before you install the outer slates. So a quick tip for you, if you're actually removing the pool table yourself before reinstallation, then before you remove these screws that hold in the center slate, what you can do is you can actually put little marks. So this mark would originally been, you used this as a ruler and drawn straight across there, and I would have matched the mark up there down here to the mark that comes up on the side just here. So when you come to refit your slate, obviously you can adjust the slate to try and get those marks exactly lined up to how they were when you removed it. So if you're happy with how the table was first installed before you dismantled it, then this is a really nice little tip and a quick way to ensure that your center slate is perfectly aligned exactly how it was before you dismantled it. Okay, so now happy that the center slate is centered in relation to the base frame. So what we're going to do at this stage, I'm not going to worry about getting the level correct just yet. What we're going to do is actually put the screws in. We're not going to tighten them up as tight as they'll go, but we'll put them in fairly snug. The 4 screws that are in the center slate. And just a quick note on the slate screws, they're quite chunky screws generally, as you can see, and the hole that's drilled through the slate, what you'll see when you look at the head always seems to kind of be at an angle. That's because they do actually drill these through at an angle. That's because generally the outside frame of the pool table is actually set at an angle, so if you went down straight you might well come out the side. So rather than going down straight as you might kind of expect it to, they are actually set at quite a steep angle, so that is completely normal. Now when I'm putting these screws into holes that I know already exist, I prefer to do it manually rather than with the electric screwdriver, just so you can kind of get a feel for what's happening and that it is actually tightening up. What can happen if this screw's gone into the same hole, you know, the table's been dismantled a few times over the years, then the screw might not bite into the wood, and so you'll be doing this and it won't actually tighten up, it will just keep spinning and keep spinning, in which case you want to use a longer screw, or you're going to have to look at possibly doing something to the hole to thicken it out. So it's a good idea, rather than get straight in there with the electric screwdriver, to kind of use a manual one, because you can kind of have a feel for what's actually happening as that screw goes down. So we're almost at the stage where we're going to want to butt up the outer slates to our centre one, which is now fixed in position. But before we do that, there's a couple of important things that we've got to think about. So the next stage, before we close the joint up on these slates, is we want to give them a bit of a clean up. We can see we've got the remnants of the old beeswax and stuff is still in there. So what we'll try and do is get rid of as much of this as we can. Be sure to get rid of all the little bits in there as well. Let's blow them out quickly. Now we're going to be doing the beeswax joint seal for these slates. One of the arguments against beeswax, there's two kind of ways of doing it, as we'll cover later in the video. One of the main arguments against beeswax is if you have if you're in a particularly hot country or whatever, you get extreme changes in temperature, it can cause it to fail. There's a little tip that helps kind of prevent that, and that's what we're going to have a look at now before we put ours together. We're not going to have to do it because our slate is doweled, but we're going to show you two methods if you don't have a doweled slate to help ensure that this stays solid and doesn't move if you're using a beeswax seal, as we will be later in the video. So to help prevent the beeswax seal from failing over time, what you can do is actually put a few little dabs of super glue, aka crazy glue, usually 3 dots per slot, and there's two different ways that you can do that. So the first method of doing it is simple enough, and you would do this immediately before you do your beeswax. So you would put these together, get everything leveled up before you do your beeswax. You would put 3 little blobs of your super glue, one in the middle and one kind of either side of that, and just let that seep down. Wipe off any excess, obviously before that super glue sets, remembering that it does set quite quickly, and then you beeswax over across the whole thing. That's the kind of the simple way of doing it. And that little bit of super glue, and you want the kind of the runny super glue rather than the gel stuff, because you want it to actually drip down into that joint and create a bit of a seal. And that effectively acts as in the same way that a dowel does. It's going to help prevent any kind of slippage in this way. So that's the kind of the easy way of doing it. There's a second way of doing effectively the same thing, and that's what we're going to show you now. And again, it's completely optional which one you do, but if you want to do this one, you've got to do this one before you close the slate joint. So let's have a look at that quickly before we move on. So this is the second super glue option that requires a little bit of preparation. What you want to do is get yourself a little bit of a thin paper, just off of a lined pad. It's kind of as thin as possible, just standard paper. What you want to do is grab your, choose where you're going to spray it. So you want one in the middle and kind of one either side of it. So you're going to do 3 per joint. And just in here, you're going to use your spray glue, which will be exactly the same spray glue that we're going to be using later in the video during the installation of the felt. Just put a little spot of your spray glue on there, and then just take your piece of paper, ensuring that it's thinner than the slate, and just literally glue that onto the side there. And then what you want to do at that stage is put a little mark, a little cross or a little mark just there, so you know that that is where the paper is located. And then the stage after this is exactly the same as it would be whether you put this paper in or not. So what you're going to do is, once you've brought these slates together and everything is leveled up and you're just about to do your beeswax seal, before you do that, you'd get your super glue. You know where they are because obviously this will be closed, but you have a little mark here, and that's exactly where you put a little squirt down, and it will soak into this paper and help bond these two together. So that's a nice little tip, and is really well worth doing if you don't have the luxury of the doweled slate. So now we can move on, and we're ready to butt the outer slate into the centre one. We want to make sure we get these nice and tight. When you butt it together, you have to make sure that the size of the gap that you've got is fairly uniform all the way across the gap, and hopefully when you put the screws in, if it's a table that's been used before, yeah, you see that one's actually found its previous hole, so that's good. You know that's in exactly the same location it was before. So now just go around and again tighten all these screws up. Don't over tighten them, just get them so that they're just snug. Perfect. If if you have to slacken off these 2 screws to get the alignment right, sometimes you have to with the dowel, if it's quite tight, you can go ahead and do that. There we go. So at this stage we've got all 3 slates and they're all screwed down, not amazingly tight, just tight enough to hold them in situ. And what we're going to do is looking at levelling the slates. Now we're going to be using just standard spirit levels. We've got 6-foot one here, we've got a 2-foot one there, and we've got a couple of others that we can draw in if we need to. You can use kind of machinist levels for this, which are little kind of 12-inch ones, super accurate, also kind of expensive, and most people watching these probably haven't got those at home. So what we're going to do is we're going to level this up using hopefully something that you've got and you've got easy access to. If you haven't got one of these, you should be able to borrow one quite easily. They're very common. So first of all, let's get a feel for what we're facing. So if we put that across the slates, what this is going to do is this is going to show us whether we've got a raised centre or a lowered centre, if that makes any sense. Quite often on these tables, over time, because of the weight, the table will dip in the centre, and so we'll get a gap there. Other times it can be drooping to the outside. So what you can do is have a look under the spirit level and get a gauge for what we're get kind of a feel for what we're dealing with. So here's the centre of the spirit level. You can see we've got quite a big gap there. As you follow that along to the side over here, we go across the slate joint just here, and then the gap starts to disappear, and obviously it will disappear completely as we get towards the end of the spirit level. So likewise, it's also exactly the same on the other side. Got exactly the same situation here. So this tells us that this centre slate is sitting lower than our 2 outer slates. To bring this level so that the whole thing will match this spirit level, obviously this centre slate needs to come up a little bit. So a useful tool for levelling up the slates is to use these wooden shims. These are available from any kind of decent hardware store. These are particularly long ones. These are 16-inch. These are longer than I'd normally choose, so you can get these at 8-inch or even 6-inch, which are much better for this particular job, but unfortunately this is all that they had, and we did look around 3 stores to buy these. This is all that we could find locally to do this. It's absolutely fine. They're still going from virtually nothing and graduating up. They're just kind of a lot longer than you actually need them, but they'll still do the same job. So we're going to start by raising this section of the 2 slates here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to slacken off both screws on either side of the joint. So here's our slate joint, and this is the section that we want to raise. We can see above it this big gap right in here, and that's what we're going to try and get rid of. So I'm going to place my wedge just in around that section there, and then just tap the wedge in, and as you slowly tap that in, you get slightly deeper and deeper. This gap in here should slowly start to decrease. So next I'm just going to place one on the, I don't want to go too much in one lift, so I'm going to go the other side and start bringing the slate up a little bit on the other side of the joint as well. And once you're at a point where you think that you're happy, just zip these back down. So we've just brought this up to level, or just under level. Don't bring it up too much because we know that we're quite a long way out. So I'm going to move over to the other side and just repeat that, start bringing this up, and then I'll bring this one up to the full level, and then I can go back and double check that one. So what you're trying to do is just to level these up so you're not getting that daylight showing through anymore. You can see we've closed that gap up. You can't see my finger from the back at all now, and you want to make sure that they're nice and flush. little trick you can do just to make sure that there's no edge there is just to grab one of your little wedges and try it in both directions. Obviously if you've got one that's slightly higher than the other, it will catch. That's actually looking pretty good now. Yeah. So here's our level after levelling. Compare that to before. You can see my finger running across the bottom. You can now see no light running through it. As you go towards the ends, no light going through in either direction. So you know that these three in relation to one another are nice and flat and level. Okay, so we now have our three slates so that they're running nice and flat in relation to one another in this direction. So now you want to actually take the reading off of the level. Now thankfully we've managed to get ours absolutely bang on, so I'm happy with that. But let's say for example you were showing, when you did your level, you were showing that it actually needed raising on this corner here. So then what you could do is you come to this side, put a little shim in the end and tap it in just a little bit. Move this across a little bit further. It must still cross over onto the final piece of slate, and tap that in until you get a nice level that you're happy with. Then put this back to the centre, and obviously this will throw off this level again, so you slacken off these screws, do that, so you close the gap underneath, tighten those up, back to this one, slack those off, tap those in, bring that back up, so again you've got it nice and flat. And then you've got it running a little bit higher on that end that it needed, but still remaining flat across the three. Okay, so next we turn the spirit level through 90 degrees, and we're going to measure the level of the table in this direction. And what you want to do is you want to do it on the kind of end of each slate section. So here I can see that I'm looking very level, which is nice. I'm just going to move that down to this side of the first slate, and then I'm going to move to the other side of the joint. Spot on. And I'm going to repeat that, obviously this side, and then at the end. Okay, so we've levelled this up and we're happy with it. We were very lucky as we were taking the level in this direction. We managed to get it absolutely perfect, so we're happy with that. However, when you come to take this level yourself, you might find that it's not perfect. You may see that one side needs to be raised up. If you need to do that, it's not a problem. All you've got to do is put wedges in, and usually it will show you that you need to raise the whole of one side up rather than, because if it's saying that the slates need to be raised differently, then obviously they're not flat in relation to one another. But assuming that they are flat in relation to one another, then if it's telling you anything, it would tell you that all three slates are sloping in one direction, so you'd want to bring it up on one side. Now if you wanted to do that, we've still got the wedges in, we haven't cut those off yet, so you'd want to put an extra wedge. You've got to lift the whole side evenly. So I'm going to put an extra wedge in towards the end. I've got my two wedges in here, I've got my two wedges in here, and then I put an extra wedge in on the other end, and you just want to raise it up a little bit. So again, you put your spirit level on it and just work in the corner, tap that in until you get that level spot on, and then move your way down, exactly the same here, tap this one in, make sure that's level, remembering to slacken off the screws. Again this side, and then you want to do that so that you're ensuring by doing it on each corner of the slate that each of these is absolutely spot on level in relation to one another, and you're doing it along the whole length, if that makes any sense. Once you've done that, you're going to need to take your box level once again, your spirit level, turn it around 90 degrees, put it between your three slates, and just make sure that you're not seeing any daylight and that they are still nice and flat in relation to one another, because obviously you will just have adjusted that. So that's how you do that, should you need to. Okay, so we're at the stage now where we're level and we're happy with everything. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go around and tighten up the screws, make sure they're all tightened up to full tightness now, and then I'm going to go around, I'm going to double check everything again. It only takes 5 minutes, and if you're going to do it, now's the time to do it. So I'm going to tighten them all up, I'm just going to double check everything's good, and if so, then we can move on. So once you've got your wedges in, you've levered it all up and you're happy with the way everything is set and you're good to go, one little thing that you don't want to miss is to ensure that your centre frame, your supporting central frame, is also supporting the slates correctly, because you've gone around the edges and you put these wedges in, that's effectively lifted the edges of these slates. And so you may well in areas have lifted the bottoms of the slates away from your central supports. So what we're going to do is go underneath the pool table, and where the slates meet is where your supports will be, and you can either use your wooden shims. The problem is if you use the wooden shims, you kind of got to do them from both directions so that you're supporting, this will be on the underneath of the table, from both directions, so you're supporting both slates. The other way of doing it is to get something that's flat rather than wedge shaped, that's the right size. When you put these in, you've got to be careful not to force them in, because what you don't want to do is start to lift the slates again. So you want to find it where it's snug, but not that you have to force it in, because that will force the slate up. So let's get under the table and have a look. So here we are underneath the table, and this is the central support. This is part of the H frame. And as we can see, obviously we've got a shim up in this corner, just in here, and so this would have raised this up a little bit. So we would have created a bit of a gap in there, as we can see. So currently this timber, and therefore the slate that's on top of it, isn't being supported at all. So what we want to do is, you might want to do a couple of these per gap. Just find the gaps. Definitely one there, and just push that in. Like I said, don't force that in, don't start hitting it in, because you don't want to start to raise the slate. Just push it in with your fingers so it's nice and firm, and it's got a bit of extra support in this area. And then if you want, when you come around and you cut all these shims off, you can also pop underneath and just cut these off under here as well if you need to. So you want to put these in roughly, I'm going to put 2 in, so you want to divide the slate roughly into into thirds, so this one will be approximately that distance from the centre. I've tried it with my thinnest one, tried it with my thinnest one, 1 millimetre, too thin, 2 millimetre, that might be the one. I was going to try a 3 millimetre. 3 millimetre will fit from that side. Oh, there we go. Yeah, and from this side. Yes, that's good. So I'm just going to place that there. And once you get it in, you can move it down a little bit if the tightness is in that direction. And that's sat in there quite snug now. It's definitely not going to fall out, and that's given a little bit of extra support just here. So you're going to go around, you're going to repeat that. I'm going to repeat that obviously on the opposite side, on this same one, and then I'm going to go over to the opposite side over here. I'm going to place another one in here and again in there. If your framework is a little bit more complex, you might have more cross beams than we've got. We've only got 2. You might have an extra one on either side, and you might want to look at supporting those as well. But the important ones are to support where your 2 slates meet. And then, not quite as important but optional, you can also support the cross member going lengthways where that sits on there. So again, just find the right size one, nice snug fit, but not so you have to force it in. Okay, another stage, and again this is completely optional. If you've got these nice kind of hard plastic packing wedges like we've got here, what you can do is you can put this in next to your wooden shim. The wooden shim may compact a little bit over time, because obviously it's a fairly soft material and the slates are very, very heavy. Whereas if you can put one of these in next to it, as long as you're not forcing it in, you want to find something that just fits in nice and snug. And just sit that next to your wooden shim, and then it's just a backup really. If this wooden shim should ever compact over time, you've got a nice plastic shim here which won't compact, and that will start to take the weight as soon as this compacts, if it ever does. So it's 100% optional and just a little backup. So next we want to trim off the excess that's left on these shims, tidy it up. When you cut these off, you want to cut them further back than the edge of your slate, just here. You can snap them off. I don't like doing that, because when you snap them off, you snap them off kind of half in the joint, if that makes any sense. So when you snap them off, you're actually snapping off a little bit of the supporting material. I prefer to just go underneath with a multi-tool and just very carefully cut these off underneath where the supporting timber is for your slate. If you're going to use the multi-tool, just cut it really, really shallow until you're at a point where you can almost snap it off from the line that you cut. You don't really want to be cutting up into the bottom of your slate support. So there we have it, guys. That is how to level up the slates for your pool table. This is part of a series of videos. We're also going to be doing videos on various other things, including sealing the joints and various other bits and bobs for these pool tables. So we'll add some relevant links for you in the information section below, so you can go down and check those out if you need any help on any other part of building your pool table. Thank you very much for watching. Before you go, can we ask you a quick favour in return? If you found this at all useful or at all helpful or even entertaining, perhaps you could give us a quick thumbs up, a like on YouTube before you leave. And if you could hit that subscribe button, it would be really, really appreciated. Thanks guys, we'll see you again on another video soon.